Imagine this. One evening, as I sat at my desk, my phone buzzed. It was my boss. He said, "If you don't drop this, I'll sue you." Just 8 seconds later, the world I thought I knew, the safe job, the steady pay, began to tilt. That threat, casual and confident, was supposed to scare me into silence. But it became his biggest mistake. Let me tell you why I had no idea, at that moment, that a simple conversation would ignite a battle, not just legal, but emotional, moral, and personal. This is the story of how someone in power tried to use the law as a weapon, and how everything turned around in unexpected ways. In the next few minutes, you'll hear how a naive worker stood up, how evidence revealed secrets, how alliances formed, and how the legal threat backfired in ways nobody saw coming. From the basics, understanding defamation, employment law, contracts, to the advanced maneuvers, injunctions, counterclaims, courtroom tactics, and the psychological pressure, you'll hear every twist, the doubt, the fear, the phone calls at midnight, the lawyer's advice, the pressure to settle, and finally the dramatic reveal. But first, let's begin with the foundation. Let me walk you through how a boss's threat, meant to suppress, instead lit the fuse. Because the moment I realized what I knew and what I had, the ground shifted. And that's where our story truly begins. When someone in authority threatens legal action, many immediately think, "I'm doomed." But the first thing you must understand is, a threat is not a guarantee. It's a statement of intention, not a verdict. And to turn that into reality, there must be legal grounds. Let me start with defamation. If the threat is because you spoke truthfully, or because you shared something in the public interest, the threat of being sued for defamation may be hollow. We'll talk later about how truth is a defense and how public interest can strengthen your position. Then there's contract law. If your boss claims you breached some clause, non-disclosure, confidentiality, or some restrictive covenant, you need to examine whether that clause is enforceable. Many contracts are overbroad or vague and can be challenged. Also, employment law. In many jurisdictions, employees or former employees have rights. You may have protections against unfair dismissal, coercion, retaliation. If your boss's threat is stepping over those lines, you may already have a legal shield, but to use those rights, you must document everything. Every email, text message, recorded phone call, where legally permitted, witness conversations. The evidence is your armor. And that's something I learned early in this conflict. Let me tell you how I started building that evidence, how I preserved silence when necessary, and how I began to see that the threat was not as solid as it seemed. Because in a legal battle, preparation is crucial. And that's where I started. Soon after the threat, I began to receive subtle pressure. A whispered conversation in a meeting. A sudden warning from HR. "We don't like trouble." But I stayed quiet, collected, documenting every interaction that I pulled my files, performance reviews, communications, earlier emails where issues had been raised. I noted down dates, times, names. I asked, discreetly, whether anyone else had similar problems. I found 2 colleagues who whispered to me that they too felt threatened. They agreed to help, to share what they knew. One evening, I got a text. "Drop this or lose everything." That was the turning point. I copied the text. I took a screenshot. I saved it. I showed it to my attorney. And there I discovered something. The text, if revealed, would damage his case more than mine. Because it exposed intent. At this point, I began making small, deliberate moves, asking for written confirmations rather than verbal instructions, refusing to meet in isolated places, insisting on email trails. And as I did that, I sensed panic. The threats became more aggressive, but also more sloppily phrased. That's when I realized power threatened, but evidence rules. And his mistake was underestimating the power of documentation and alliance. I was no longer alone. And that shift in mindset changed everything. He filed a notice. A legal letter demanding I cease certain actions, retract, apologize, or else. It felt like the letter of the moment. Formal, intimidating, printed on letterhead. But I read it carefully. And I found flaws. First, it claimed damage to reputation, but gave no specifics. Which statements, when, how? That vagueness weakened much of the threat. Second, it used aggressive legal language but lacked supporting evidence. Third, the deadlines were impossibly short, likely meant to pressure me into a hasty response. My lawyer and I drafted a reply, not as a groveling apology, but as a firm but reasoned counter. We asked for clarification on their claims. We requested proof. We pointed out contradictions. And we did something bold. We gave notice that we were also considering counterclaims, if necessary, for defamation, harassment, or civil damages. When I delivered that letter, I felt a surge. Instead of trembling before the threat, I was pushing back. And that changed the dynamic. Suddenly, it was no longer a boss versus employee. It was legal adversaries. Over the next weeks, the pressure built. They offered a meeting, face to face. My mind buzzed with risk. But I insisted on having my attorney there, recording, or, at least in writing. They balked. They said, "Let's meet informally." I refused. I insisted on formal channels. That insistence annoyed them. But it also limited their chance to ambush me. In the meeting that finally happened, the room was charged. He was calm, collected, but I could see tension behind his eyes. He opened. "We never wanted this to escalate." I responded, "Nor did I. But your notice left me little choice." He spoke of reputational harm, of breach of trust, of company policy. I responded with evidence. Your own emails approving some of what I did, past practices, inconsistent treatment of other employees. I asked, "If this is so wrong, why was it allowed before?" He faltered. He mentioned settlement. I said I was open to discussion, but only on fair, transparent terms. As we spoke, I watched his face shift. The confidence he had when threatening me was gone. He was defensive, cautious now. Later, his legal team sent drafts of settlement terms. Some were ludicrous. You must delete all your posts, retract publicly, agree never to work in the industry again. I refused. We countered. And in the back and forth, I realized something. Each time they weakened terms, removed clauses, added conditions, they conceded ground. Eventually we got to the core, removed defamatory statements, stopped certain actions, and some compensation for losses I suffered. I accepted, but only after ensuring nothing in the agreement left me vulnerable. No gag orders, no overly broad clauses, no hidden traps. It was a hard negotiation. But by then, the boss who threatened me was the one who was negotiating under pressure. The legal threat had become a negotiation tool, and he was losing leverage. But the story doesn't end with a signed agreement. After settlement, he tried subtle retaliation, withholding recommendations, delaying severance, negative references. I anticipated it. I prepared and I asked for the settlement in writing, with enforceable penalties for breach. I insisted the agreement state mutual non-disparagement, and that references be neutral. I asked for proof of performance reviews. I told them I'd monitor what they said.